Namaste and greetings. I'm Mahima Kapoor, researcher and assistant editor at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi. Welcome you all to the IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. In light of the budget announcement on the 1st of February, we have gathered for a panel discussion on rural realities and Union Budget 2022-23. Under the series, The State of Villages, #Rural Realities. This deliberation is being organized by the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. I feel honored to introduce the chair, Dr. J. Dennis Rajakumar. Sir is the Director of Economic and Political Weekly, Research Foundation, Mumbai. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I feel privileged to introduce our eminent panel for today. Professor C.S.C. Shekhar is a professor at the Institute of Economic Growth, New Delhi. Welcome, sir. Mr. Himanshu Shekhar, thank you, sir. Mr. Himanshu Shekhar Mishra is the Senior Editor, Political and Current Affairs, NDTV India. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Dr. Jyotsna Jha is the Director at the Center for Budget and Policy Studies, Bengaluru. Welcome, ma'am. Now, I invite Dr. Rajakumar to take the proceedings further, and we look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahima. It's wonderful to be here in the morning with the esteemed panelists, that too on a vital topic, rural realities and Union Budget 2022-23. On behalf of the panelists and my own, let me welcome all the audience to this particular session, panel discussion. We are indeed privileged to have three distinguished speakers with us this morning. Professor Shekhar from IEG, Dr. Himanshu from NDTV, and Dr. Jyotsna from Center for Budget and Policy Studies, Bengaluru. And when I see the profile, we see that Mr. Himanshu comes from print, from media house. Dr. Jyotsna comes from institute which is directly involved in policy advocacy, and we are having Professor Shekhar coming from academics. So as I see it, we are having a blend of personalities hailing from different walks of life, and the topic that converges all our interest this morning is the realities of modern India, that is rural realities. Since Union Budget 2022-23 is the context, we are actually going to see in what way Union Budget 2022-23 will impact rural realities and thereby bring about some change to realities faced by modern India. Now, let me take a few minutes to provide the context, because the realities have to be contextualized. So, as I said earlier, it's a novel theme indeed. We all agree that rural and urban sectors, they are the dualistic characters of the Indian economy. And if you look at the policy focus on rural development, though the forms and substance of the policy had been changing over the years, the thrust on rural development has not been relegated to backseat at all. You look at the rhetorics of successive governments of the past 7 decades, invariably rural development has remained their central theme. At the same time, how they had intervened, that would have changed. And the motivation for the intervention also would have changed. So this leads us to an important question. Why this topic is all the more relevant now? Probably we can further contextualize the relevance of this topic, that is rural realities, by examining or by just going through the growth scenario as portrayed by the recent release of national account statistics by NSO. So when we see the latest release that came out on January 31st, we see that the real GDP at 2011-12 prices is expected to have contracted by about 6.6% in 2021 compared to a growth of 3.7% registered the immediately preceding year, 2019-20. When we look at the press release of NSO in the first week of January 2022, we see that GDP growth rate was expected to grow at about 9.2% in 21-22 against minus 6.6% of 2021. So that means we are having a scenario like the growth rate had dipped in the 1 year ago because of this COVID situation. There's an obvious explanation. Then we think of recovery that has taken place 2021, and the budget is very optimistic about moving forward on S2B. And in real terms, it expects the growth to go up to somewhere around 1.2% in 2023. Now, when we actually decompose this growth in terms of demand components, that's a place probably we can situate the rural realities. What we see. Now, let us again relook at the advanced estimates presented by NSO in the first week of January 2022. We find that the growth had been dragged by two important demand components, that is private final consumption expenditure and gross fixed capital formation. I will leave out gross fixed capital formation and I'll just focus on private final consumption. If we single out that, then what we understand from that is we find that since we can break that entire year 2021-22 into first half and second half, because the way they had presented the statistics, it provides a kind of comparison between what has happened in the first half, that is covering the period April to September 2021, as opposed to the expected growth to take place from October to March end 21-22. So we find that the private final consumption was growing at the rate of 13.5% in the first half, and it straight away was expected to dip to 1.8% in the second half. And second half is much more recent, right? And that would actually have to be considered as a underlying theme for the budget. Now, having brought out this detail of the steep drop in the growth rate of private final consumption in the recent times, in the second half of 2021-22, we are in that phase. The obvious question is, since I already said Indian economy is characterized by both rural and urban sector, which sector is likely to be impacted by this phenomena? Now, the latest information what I could get regarding the that estimated population living in rural sector as compared to urban sector is from the PLFS 2019-20, which was released sometimes in July 2021. So according to PLFS, about 69.6% of the estimated population live in the rural sector. If you are looking at the total number of households in the rural sector, they constitute about 67.1%. That means, right, continuing with the old story, more than 2/3 of the India's population live in rural sector. So the question is, when we talk about the drop in private final consumption expenditure, what is it going to be? Is it going to be mostly a rural phenomenon, or is it going to be an urban phenomenon? This obviously leads to a first question. Now, an associated phenomenon is that with this is that the kind of employment that rural households are having. Now, for instance, if you look at according to this PLFS only 1920, I mean, it's just the year we can call it as pre-COVID year, but I'm sure that things would have become far more worse than improved in the last 2 years. Now, according to this PLF's 1920, we see that 53.2% of the rural households are in self-employment and 24.8% in the casual labor, which means we are talking about 12.9% in the regular wages and 9.1% in the other segment. In other words, roughly about 80% of rural households are dependent on casual employment or self-employment. Now, when I see the breakup of their employment by sector, this is very interesting observation because this can be easily linked to what the budget has. Is that 61.5% of rural workers are in agriculture sector and 12.2% in construction sector. I can imagine that all of them belong to informal. Then 7.66% in trade, restaurant, etc., and 7.3% in manufacturing. In other words, 90% of the rural workers are concentrated in these four segments. And I'm sure that bulk of these are in the informal sector. Now, these statistics we can supplement with some latest data we could get from CMI, according to which it says unemployment in October, we are talking October 2021, in rural sector had actually jumped up to 7.9% in October 2021 from 6.0% recorded in September, which means we are talking about a kind of rising joblessness, right? That too, wherever there is an employment, it is mostly in the informal segment, which has, I would say, that very least security, not only in terms of job, but the security that offers for livelihood itself. And associated with this is the kind of growth phenomena that is unfolding. So probably, right, I would present this before our distinguished speakers as, stories representing or reflecting the rural realities. Now with this, some opening remarks, we can go ahead. And as the organizers had already, advised us, we can stick to 10 minutes each by the speakers. So I'll go in the same order that I'm seeing here on the screen. So we'll start with the Dr. Jyotsna, right? Then we'll move on to Dr. Shekhar, and then we can ask Mr. Himanshu to give us, because I'm sure that he has a lot more ground reality stories to share. Thank you. Dr. Jyotsna, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, IMPRI, for having me. I was not ready to go first. I thought I'll come later, but it's fine. So, and you have, thank you also for basically laying the ground so well as a chair, because that takes us to the real issues of rural India. And despite fast urbanization, where we are today, the reality is that rural continues to be home to far more number of people as compared to urban. And a lot of our urban low-income households still actually depend quite a bit on rural, because that's where they belong, and they come just to work. Even when they live, they don't really live in urban areas. It's just to work and earn their livelihood, and they go back. So with that background, I will talk more about the sectors I know better. And I'll start with, say, whole issue of employment as Dr. Rajakumar also pointed that out. Interesting part of employment in rural area, as we all have learned as students of economics, for last decades we have been learning, that it's also underemployment. And that also tells us, especially if we talk of women, that a large number of the employment figure is also actually misleading. Just because you are spending some time on your field, you are not really employed. So employment rates, perhaps, unemployment rates perhaps are much more than what we actually see, because we don't declare ourselves as unemployed since we have some work. And I think that would be much more for women as compared to men, also because of the cultural issue of, whether you see yourself as unemployed or not, despite the fact that you are actually seeking ways of earning money, and still you don't see yourself as unemployed. So that's the definition issue. And there I think I will come to NREGA, and I'm not the first one to speak on NREGA. I do feel NREGA plays a very important role in many ways. It's not only about employment, it also establishes, for example, that wage rates, that you cannot go below that. It also has certain other guarantees when it comes to, again, women, in terms of, for example, if you are more than a particular number of women, you should have creche. So it establishes certain norms. Now look at NREGA allocations in this budget. It has gone down from revised estimates. And the fact that you still have pending payments from the last year, and if that you take, then if you look at the downward, it's not 25%. If you look at that, then it's about 50%, if those are adjusted from this year's allocation. And that tells you that it's not about increasing it later. It's about making it unpredictable, making it difficult in later stages. When you don't have allocation, then it becomes much more difficult to seek employment through that. And it also is an indicator of that you are going to, you are looking at increasing employment through other means. And also this is guided by the philosophy that this is a dole, and if it comes through other means, suppose say from capital investment, then that's not a dole. And there I think we need to again look at the conceptual issue, like employment, unemployment, that this is also for infrastructure. This is also for maintaining rural and building rural infrastructure. Along with that, it also guarantees employment, and which is now not there. And this allocation, which has, even the revised estimates money, is much lower than what one would actually need to give employment, 100 days employment to all eligible. One estimate that has come is at least 3 times more than 3 times more, actually, higher than what has been allocated. So that I think is a failure of duty. And also because if you look at the consumption expenditure, if we are talking of consumption expenditure going down, and that is very obvious, then one of the sure way of doing it, of influencing it, is to giving money in those hands who are likely to spend the entire money and will not save. So that way NREGA is one of the best ways of ensuring that people are spending money, because they are not going to keep it. It's entirely spent on fulfilling the needs. And therefore, it also has the potential to influence consumption expenditure. Next, from there, I will go to, I'll actually not, any other, if you look at income transfer, then there is, in some ways, if you look at it, that minimum support price. But I will not go into agriculture, knowing well that there are others who will talk about agriculture. I'll talk about 1 or 2 other sectors which will perhaps remain untouched in my remaining time. One is education and one is nutrition. Because rural is not only about economic areas, so to say. Now, what have we got from budget? We have got e-Vidya from the budget. What does that mean? Who is going to benefit? When you have 200 channels, who are going to invest in it, and who are going to benefit from it? Even if it's PPP, who is going to benefit? There's no rural sector that's going to benefit. The money is not going to flow in rural sector. On one hand, apart from the fact that it has serious issues from the education perspective, I won't talk about that. I'll stick to the economic implications of that. And when you are talking of digital teachers, then you will also not provide adequate number of teachers who you were supposed to provide. Our schools are actually empty, and a large number of states have vacancies. Now, when you are not providing teachers, you are also not providing that much income to rural areas. One of our recent multiplier and social accounting based matrix study in Karnataka, what we found that not multiplier effect is not so high, but if you look at the distributive effect using multiplier, what you find, multiplier is also positive and high, but not as high as suppose the capital investment would be. But when you are looking at distributive impact, which also has links with consumption expenditure, then education has the highest figure there. So the distributive impact of public spending on education, which in turn also means hiring teachers, is very high. Now, when you do that, and these teachers are located in all rural areas, then that also boosts rural economy. So, and private expenditure goes up, and other multiplier effect takes place. So even in sectors which are not necessarily rural sectors, the way budget has announced things, it will not benefit rural economy. Similarly, if you take about what is happening to say nutrition and Anganwadis, which is a major way of employing rural women, and what's happening there. In terms of budget, if you see, the allocations have remained roughly the same, which also means not only that it's perhaps in real terms it would go down. And when you are focusing on select few, that again means that most of them will not get anything. So that is an issue when you have this approach of exemplar, or making 10% very high quality, which means that 90% remain bad quality. And when you are continuing not to see them as professionals, you are also not pumping any money in the economy. And so there are ways of pumping money through public spending, which ensures both distribution and therefore more equitable. And I'm talking again from a gender perspective, and also pushes consumption expenditure. We did one, and this is my last point. If necessary, and if comes back, then I have a few points related to agriculture, but I'll wait to listen to others. But one last point about, what we saw in, and we all have seen across the country, that it's agriculture which has sustained. All other sectors have seen the decline at a low rate, but agriculture has seen the growth rate. And when you have money in the hands of farm sector, that also, it's well known that it also impacts manufacturing, especially through demand creation. And we did a macroeconomic impact, COVID impact study in Chhattisgarh, and we clearly saw that a scheme like Nyay actually played a role. Of course, there are issues with that, because it goes only to land owners and not to farmers. So that's a separate issue. But when you have any ways of influencing income in rural areas, that also creates demand for manufacturing and pushes growth. So rural should not be seen only as an area which is sucking money. It also actually contributes and has the potential, has a very high potential of being a vehicle of adopting equitable means to push consumption expenditure and push more inclusive growth rather than a very, very unequal growth. So I'll end there. Second round I'll keep for other things. Thank you. You are muted.
Mute, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Jyotsna. It was great to listen to you. Yeah, the points that where the allocation should have been, we don't see much happening there. And if that all it happens, then it would have triggered the consumption cycle in the economy. So that's a well argued point. Now we'll may I now request Professor Shekhar to come on? Yeah, Professor Shekhar would.
Thank you, Dr. Rajakumar. Thanks to IMPRI for giving me this opportunity of sharing my views with this enlightened panel and also the listeners. And after a very comprehensive overview by the chair and also by Dr. Jha, Jyotsna Jha, about the rural economy in general, my task becomes slightly easier. So what I'll do is I'll focus on the important sector of agriculture, which is very crucial for rural economy. As Dr. Rajakumar said in his opening remarks, nearly 61% of the households, as per the latest data, seem to be engaged in agriculture. So that obviously is a core sector for rural economy, although the share of income that's emanating from agriculture seems to have gone down in the recent situation assessment survey. So I'll focus on agriculture. So agriculture can be, in my view, from two perspectives. One is what is happening to not only growth in agriculture per se, but also growth of the sub-components within agriculture. And then what is agriculture's share to farmers' income or agricultural households' income in the... So this is where I think budget needs to be placed. So if we look at the growth trajectory of agriculture in the last few years, as Dr. Jyotsna Jha also mentioned, agriculture is one sector which has done quite well even during the pandemic. And in the last, growth rate seemed to be quite good. In 2019-20, it was 4%, 4.3%, followed by 3.6%, and it expected to be 3.9% in the coming year, the growth rate of agriculture. So the government doesn't seem to have announced any major big ticket allocations for agriculture per se. But when we look at the slightly at the components, growth rate of the components, if we can see that actually crop sector roughly accounts for 58% of the gross value added on an average in the last 5-6 years. And more than a quarter of the gross value added of agriculture comes from livestock and dairying sector. And then forestry and logging and fishing and aquaculture contribute around 8 to 9% each. So in this scenario, what is the growth pattern of these specific subsectors within agriculture? Then crop sector has been clocking a growth rate of roughly around 1% on an average in the last 5 years. Whereas livestock and fisheries have been clocking 8 and 9% growth rate on an average. In fact, they have been pretty steady over the years. So both in terms of share as well as growth pattern, livestock and dairying sector seems to be extremely important for rural economy. And it's also important for the rural economy from a different perspective, which is farmers, how much of income farmers are deriving from various activities. So to that, if we turn to situational assessment survey of 2019, it clearly shows that more than 55% of the income right now for households is coming from livestock and wages. Wages is giving the maximum income around 40%, and 15% is roughly coming from livestock and dairying, and less than 40% is coming from crop sector. So crop sector has gone down from 50% in the last SAS in 2014 to less than 40%. So crop sector has declined in its importance in terms of giving a income to the rural households. So in that sense, livestock sector again becomes important for, and this importance of livestock sector goes up enormously as we move down the land holding size. That is, the small and marginal farmers and landless, they actually seem to depend a lot more on livestock sector than so what I'll do is I'll just briefly touch upon the allocations for each of these subsectors and see whether the money has been put in the right places. So first, let me take up the crop sector per se. In the crop sector, going with the overall thrust of the budget this year, the focus has been on capital investment and infrastructure. When I see the budgetary allocations, there are three things that stand out. The first is the allocation for Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana. As we all know, Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana has been a flagship program which was launched in the UPA 2 time in 2018, and it is one of the few schemes which gives a lot of flexibility to the states and even districts to devise their own agricultural plans and then carry them out without strings attached. So this RKVY has been a very important program, and also it gave some good results. But unfortunately, after this government took over in 2014, they rolled back the investments or expenditure in this particular scheme. But fortunately, better sense seems to have prevailed this time, and they have increased the budgetary allocation from 2,000 crores to 10,000 crores. They have increased by 5 times. But there is a slight clarification that needs to be given here. They have brought few other schemes into the fold of Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana. So even factoring in those additional schemes that have been brought under the umbrella of RKVY, the budgetary allocation has gone up by more than double. So that's a very good, in my view, that's an important thing. It also gives a lot of flexibility to states to devise their own ag programs and carry them out. The second one is Agricultural Infrastructure Fund. If you remember, during the pandemic, the finance minister has announced Agri Infrastructure Fund, mainly for post-harvest infrastructure. To this, in this, they have increased the budgetary allocation from 200 crores to 500 crores, which is 150% increase. And the third is, so both these RKVY as well as Ag Infrastructure Fund, both actually look at the rural infrastructure part for agriculture. So the mechanism through which they want to promote this infrastructure and the entire rural economy is through FPOs. I think the government has been laying a lot of stress on this formation of these 10,000 FPOs. And to that, they have increased the budgetary allocation from 250 crores to 500 crores in this budget. So it's again a 100% increase. So these are roughly, so the broad thrust seems to be on creation of infrastructure and also creating some kind of institutional mechanisms to carry out those infrastructure thrust. And in addition, what I find extremely, I think, useful to have is earlier, in the earlier budgets, many of the schemes used to be scattered all over. With it used to take a lot of effort to make sense of where the budgetary allocations are going. So this time they have clubbed all of them into meaningful categories, and they have put under one major scheme called Krishi Unnati Yojana, which under which they have clubbed many programs. So which makes it easier to monitor the programs and also see where there's some duplication and avoid duplication. So I think that's a good move. So this is as far as the crop sector is concerned. So quickly moving to the animal husbandry. In the animal husbandry, what they have done is one of the important things which many researchers who work in this animal husbandry and livestock sector have been arguing about is the livestock health. So livestock health and veterinary diseases has been given very little attention in the last budgets or even in the programs. So that issue has been addressed, seems to have been addressed to some extent in this budget. So the allocation for National Animal Disease Control Program has gone up from 886 crores to nearly 2000 crores. That's more than 100% increase. So that's a very good initiative in my view. And they have also slightly increased the allocation for livestock health infrastructure development fund. In addition to that, one thing, the National Livestock Mission, which is basically aimed at promoting growth and also of farmers, livestock farmers, particularly livestock rearers. The National Livestock Mission, the allocation for this scheme has gone up from 288 crores to 410 crores. It's not much. In real terms, it may be even lower, but that's still a... So, this is as far as the animal husbandry and dairying is concerned. Then coming to fisheries, Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, which is basically the flagship program to take care of the fisheries sector, there the allocation has been increased from 1200 crores to nearly 1900 crores, which is and food processing also seems to have received a lot of attention in this budget. In fact, the thrust has been moving towards food processing for quite some time in the last few budgets. But this year, they have particularly production-linked incentive scheme for food processing industry has received a lot of attention in this budget. The allocation for PLI for food processing has gone up from 10 crores to 1,022 crores, which is huge increase. Sampada Yojana, Kisan Sampada Yojana is basically aimed at providing or developing infrastructure for mega food parks and food processing industry, small scale industries. And so there also the allocation has gone up from 800 crores to 900 crores, which is not very high, but it's sort of okay. Then micro food processing, which is basically is aimed at improving infrastructure for small scale food processing units, which are basically pickle making, jaggery and things like that. For that, the allocation has substantially been increased, which is from 400 crores to 900 crores. I think that's a very good move. And food storage and warehousing also received attention. Actually, the allocation has increased from less than 1,000 crores to more than 2,400 crores. So that's a huge jump. So these are some good initiatives. So all the thrust seems to be mainly on creating infrastructure and adoption of technology. Now, quickly moving to rural development, because I think I'll only flag one issue. In rural development, most of the earlier programs like Gram Sadak Yojana, Awas Yojana, they have all got some increases in allocation. But one thing that stands out is Manrega. I think I want the views of other panelists also. Manrega, the revised estimates were showing 98,000 crores, and the budgetary allocations for this year have been brought down to 73,000 crores, which is a drop of 25,000 crores from the revised estimates. So the only explanation I can think of is that the government seems to be thinking that we are almost through with the pandemic, and perhaps there is not much, there is no acute need of Manrega, so they may have scaled down the budgetary estimates, but I think that's a little premature. Then Minister specifically mentioned about land records modernization and digitization of the land records. The allocation for that actually goes down. It has gone down from 250 crores to 239 crores, which seems a little odd. And watershed development, integrated watershed development program has received a substantial hike in its allocation from 1,200 crores to nearly 2,000 crores. So which is again a good thing. But all these schemes and programs that have been announced actually will be effective only if they are implemented well, because ultimately implementation is the key. So we'll have to keep our fingers crossed. And I just want to mention a couple of points before I close. One is about the adoption of technology, the AI-enabled technology, AI, Kisan drones and other things. I think this is a good move. One, because in assessment of farmers' claims during insurance, the area assessment, the yield loss assessment, all these things can be done much better by using the latest technology. So in that sense, this is a very important move. But it is also important for another reason. In fact, we have all been seeing the farmers' so-called farmers' perception about agriculture sector and their wanting to leave agriculture in the last situation assessment survey that was in 2013-14, and also in the recent past, they're dealing with the agriculture sector to do farming because farming is perceived as a laborious and a drudgery-prone sector. So with this adoption of technology and cutting edge technology, perhaps youngsters may be enthused to, at least a few of them may be enthused to get back to agriculture, as look at agriculture as a source of occupation. So that will be a good thing if it happens. So with that, I'll stop and I'll come back if and when there are questions. Thank you very much again.
So please unmute. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Shekhar. Some of the numbers that you brought out would actually lead to a couple of questions. We'll see. Now, I now request Mr. Himanshu. Yeah, please give out your views.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a privilege to get this opportunity. It was indeed a great learning experience to hear Professor Sekhar, Dr. Jha about the larger state of the India's agricultural economy. And this is something that, of course, I need to learn a lot more from them. As a journalist, I wish to put some facts before you, as reporters normally do. See, in last 10 days, I've traveled to 3 districts of Western UP, Shamli, Muzaffarnagar, and Meerut. These are 3 districts, and I've been through several villages in these 3 districts. And this was, of course, a part of my election coverage plan. And I've been actually talking to stakeholders in these 3 districts and used this opportunity also to interact with large number of farmers. I think I must have been to at least 15 villages in these 3 districts and spoken to scores of farmers about the challenges they are facing. Remember, the context in which the budget was presented, of course, was that big national debate that happened, and first the laws were passed by Parliament and then subsequently withdrawn. And there is a larger debate happening on agriculture. As a journalist, I have never seen agriculture being at the forefront of the national debate on India's economy or India's development. And in fact, in villages also of Uttar Pradesh, I learned that this is perhaps the first time in recent decades when, at least last 2 decades, when farmers are an important factor now in the discourse, in the political discourse. And I know as a journalist, I can tell you that it's only when during the election process, issues become part of the political discourse that the larger policy level actions normally follow. And then you know that in all the manifestos that have been presented by political parties, farmers, of course, have been at the center stage in these elections, very critical elections. Now, what are the inputs I got from farmers before the budget? This is the interviews I did a few days before the presentation of budget. The expectations of farmers. Now, lots of data has been discussed. I think I should use this opportunity to actually put before you a ground reality, in the sense that what do farmers who are working in Western UP, what do they want? What are the challenges they are facing? Now, the first challenge that was mentioned across all areas and villages that I went through was the problem of fertilizer availability and fertilizer pricing. Now, this is largely a sugarcane belt of India. And I could see that for miles and miles and for an hour, you can just drive on the highways and you only see sugarcane fields on both sides of the road. This is the sugarcane belt of India. And the first problem that farmers told me, and they expected finance minister to address this problem, was the availability of fertilizer, the pricing of fertilizer. And then on the basis of the challenges they were facing in accessing the amount of fertilizer they wanted, also at a reasonable cost, was not being available. We know that India suffered through a fertilizer crisis in last few months. They said we want FM to increase fertilizer subsidy because we think that even the rationalization of fertilizer availability has meant that large part of one farmer in Motinagar told me, I remember, that a part of his fields he's not able to cultivate because there are no fertilizers available. He has got only 5 kgs of urea, but he wants much more than that, and that is not available, readily available in the market. So they expected finance minister to address this concern of the farmers. Now, second was the cost of power, which has gone up. Now, I was reading today that a national newspaper has reported that all political parties are offering free electricity to farmers at a time when the losses of the UP Power Corporation has actually increased. Now, that is a difficult question, and I know that learned economists would have their views on this, but this is also one problem that farmers were facing. And this amounted to an increase in cost of doing farming, the basic cost of doing farming, जिसको हिंदी में बोलते हैं लागत बहुत बढ़ गई है फसल उगाने की, that has gone up. And at the same time, one issue that I think, if you can mention one issue related with agriculture which has been discussed the most, that is the MSP issue. That the rates that the MSP decided in Delhi by the central government is not the rate that farmers are getting. So there was a demand of an MSP law, the reforms in the MSP system. And this is one complaint I've seen across 3 districts in at least 15 villages. And they said, for us, the biggest issue now is an MSP law. Now, the cost of production is going up in the agriculture sector, but the income is not commensurate with the increase in the cost of production. That is essentially because in mandis, when they go to sell their produce, they don't get the MSP rate. That's one complaint I heard. And they wanted finance minister to address and introduce a set of reforms to ensure that the MSP rate is actually, farmers can actually be given on the ground. That is a gap. There's a policy gap in implementation gap rather. In terms of the rate that is decided in Delhi and what the rate that they get. So they wanted a reform on the MSP front. And fourth, the inflation. Now, as you know, as Dr. Jha also mentioned, I think Professor Shekhar has also mentioned that during the COVID period, I remember the first monetary policy statement that the RBI governor made. He said that agriculture has emerged as a beacon of hope for India. Now, this was one sector. I remember as a reporter reporting, I interviewed Agriculture Minister in the first week of April 2020, just 12 days after the imposition of a nationwide lockdown. And the first set of easing of restrictions that happened was for the agriculture sector. The movement of tractors, the movement of farm workers, the movement of other agriculture machinery, and later on, opening up of even puncture shops on highways. So the trucks, when they are moving the farm produce from the fields to the mandis. And the first indication of the fact that government was thinking of bringing a new law also came when the directions and advisories were issued to state governments to enable the farmers to sell their produce from their godowns, from the field itself, because the mandis were closed during lockdown and it had Rabi harvesting season was on. And there were problems in terms of carrying that ready produce from the field to the mandis. And farmers, of course, faced the brunt of the first lockdown. So all this had happened, and there was a thinking that this time farmers wanted a relief package. That's one word that I heard in many villages. And inflation was one concern for them. I remember a farmer told me that my kitchen budget has collapsed, and every day, there are heated debates in my home with my wife. She's not able to run the household because my incomes have gone down. Because the problem is that when farmers' income goes down, the average wage in Modi Nagar area had also gone down. That's a complaint from farmers. मालिक के पास पैसा नहीं है, हमको भी वो पैसा नहीं दे पा रहे जितना हमको देते थे पहले, कोरोना से पहले. So एक चिंता थी कि income has gone down of farm workers, farmers, and inflation, of course, has further aggravated the challenges that the farmers were facing in villages. So they wanted a roadmap to actually help contain inflation, especially in rural India. Now, what did FM do finally when she came to present the budget? I was just looking at the budget document. There are broadly, I would say, 9 important pointers for the agriculture sector that FM announced. One, the budget for the Ministry of Agriculture was increased by 9,000 crores. That is from 1,23,000 crores in 2021-22 to 1,32,000 crores in 2022-23. That's a plus 9,000 crore increase in allocation. 2.37 lakh crore is what FM announced will be the MSP payment to 1.63 crore farmers. So the availability and the of funds for MSP, of course, that was put in the before the parliament. Agriculture focus on increasing agriculture production and productivity. That's what the agriculture minister told reporters in parliament. 1,400 crores for Ken Betwa link project, and it was said that more than 9 lakh hectares of land will be irrigated. Now that's one announcement. The fourth point was chemical-free natural farming. Fifth was NABARD to facilitate supply of more funds, Kisan drones for crop assessment and spraying of insecticides, and to reduce dependence on import of oilseeds, a rationalized and comprehensive scheme to increase domestic production of oilseeds will be implemented. Now, this was the seventh announcement. 2023 declared as the International Year of Millets, more focus on enhancing consumption of millet products. And the last point, which I think Dr. Jha also mentioned in detail, was a cut in the allocation for Manrega. These were largely the 8-9 important announcements for the agriculture sector. Now, what farmers wanted and what the announcement was made, the primary concerns of farmers were not addressed. In fact, a colleague told me, I have not studied that part, that even the allocation for fertilizer subsidy is not what it was in the last financial year. It's slightly lesser this time. So farmers wanted more subsidy for fertilizer. There was, in fact, a cut in the fertilizer subsidy as well. On Manrega, as a correspondent, I can tell you that I've interviewed hundreds of migrant workers during the first lockdown and subsequently have been following this subject, shot in factories. You know, the spurt in demand for Manrega, which is a demand-driven scheme in villages, went to an unprecedented level at the peak of the lockdown, because these millions of workers in the unorganized sector, who many of them walked on foot with their families, and that became the defining image of the crisis of the first lockdown. And international media, I could see New York Times, Washington Post, they all were looking at India from the prism of the larger reverse migration that was happening to substantiate the large socioeconomic crisis that lockdown was feared to put in place. And so when these millions of workers, I remember the first data that was put in parliament by the then Labour Minister, Santosh Gangwar, in February 2021, said that 1.14 crore workers returned to their home states. That's an answer to a question during the question hour. So more than 11 million, almost 12 million workers returned to the home state. That's the official figure. Remember, it's also important to understand that there is a portal now being made for migrant workers. At that time, there was no data of migrant workers available with the government. And that actually created bottlenecks when it came to giving free food rations to the migrant workers as well, who were stranded in different states and had no ration cards also with them. And I remember interviewing large number of them, and the then late Ram Vilas Paswan, who was the food minister, I interviewed him. He said that, no, we want states to give free food to migrant workers also under the SDRF and NDRF funds that they had. And also later on, we saw 8 crore migrant workers, allocation of free food grain scheme for 2 months for these 8 crore migrant workers as well. So there was a spurt in demand for work because these were largely unemployed people, more than around 12 million people. And when they returned to their home state, we saw that there was an increase in allocation of around 40,000 crore that FM had announced in the last week of March itself under the larger COVID relief package. And subsequently, the assumption and the thinking in the government is that many of these millions of migrant workers who had returned to their home state has since started returning back to their work. In fact, when the economic survey was presented, the principal economic advisor told us, accepted in fact, that the unemployment had reached unprecedented levels during the first lockdown. And there was a significant revival by March 2021. And then the second wave, when it came towards the end of March, and the April and May were the worst phases of the COVID crisis in India, the unemployment crisis again went up. And he went on saying that there is a dearth of real-time unemployment data. There is a dearth of official real-time unemployment data. We said that there was one unemployment data set which comes, but there is a significant time lag. This is what Sanjeev Sanyal had told us in a media briefing. So there is a question also in terms of when you're talking about rural unemployment, that when the principal economic advisor says that there is a dearth of real-time official unemployment data, then the assessment also is very difficult. But the assumption is that many of these migrant workers who had returned to their home states during the first lockdown, stringent first lockdown, have since returned back, and we see the economy now gradually in the recovery mode, and many of these workers have come back. So the thinking is that the kind of allocation that was needed for Manrega after the first lockdown was imposed in March 24, 25, 5th, midnight of 2020, and which continued for 2-3 months. And then we saw the gradual easing of the lockdown restrictions. That perhaps amount of demand for work perhaps would be less than what it was in 2020. And of course, there are issues related with, I was just seeing some media reports that there are a large number of pending payments. One Hindu has reported that more than 3,300 crore is the Manrega wages which have not still been paid. And this is, of course, a complaint which keeps coming from different states. Economic survey, another significant document that was tabled in Parliament a day before the budget, also talks about the fact that agriculture credit flow for 2021 was more than the target. 15 lakh crore was the target. It was 15 lakh 75,398 crores was the total agricultural credit flow in 2021. And the new target is fixed at 16 lakh 50,000 crores. That's point that Professor Shekhar was making, that the focus seems to be on infrastructure creation, more supply of funds to the agriculture sector. So largely, I think this seems to be a work in progress, in the sense that we have seen government now, of course, has gone through a very difficult phase. You can imagine that if the GST collection in April 2020 fell to 28,000 crores, this is an important point. In April 2019, a year before the imposition of lockdown, the GST collection at that time was the highest at 1,10,000 crores. But in April 2020, it fell to 28,000 crores. So I think we reported it very extensively that this reduction in the revenue for the government was from 1,10,000 crore to 28,000 crores. And I remember that at that time, and Rajakumar sir, I can tell you that if we are having this debate 2 years back, we would have been discussing something very different, in the sense that the first directive that came from Department of Expenditure was that all new schemes announced in budget 2020 is being frozen. An incredible thing that the government had to do. So they have faced duress, and I think that we have to keep that in mind when we discuss the larger state of the Indian agriculture.
Thank you. you have well laid out the rural expectations, though they came from your brief sojourn to a few districts in UP, but still you had well laid out the expectations. And just opposing the budget proposals with all that gives us some idea as to what is the kind of realities that budget had incorporated insofar as the rural sector is concerned. Now we'll move on to the next stage of our panel. I have not seen any questions so far being put on the chat box. If participants have any question, you may now come forward and pose it.
Yes, sir, let me pose a few questions and then we can go to each panelist. As all the panelists also covered the NREGA issue, last year also it became a big issue. Then the finance minister also came and said that, okay, if it will be required, then we will allot it. So the NREGA budget seems to be so flexible that from the revenue side, it doesn't make sense budget as an exercise. That how seriously we see it, because this time, last time also and before also that happened. How do panelists see this flexibility of NREGA in the budget exercise? Because there is a lot of variation in the numbers also accruing to the budget deficit. Another point I thought to also gain was the issue of MSP. How does the panelists see the MSP issue? Because that has especially after the farmers' agitation, that has come as a big issue, especially Shekhar sir, how do you see the feasibility of MSP if we universalize it, because the ground situation is entirely different and so on and so forth. And I also thought to ask Jyotsna ma'am that how do you see the health aspect, especially in rural areas? We had Ayushman and National Digital Health Mission and other announcements also, not so much this time, and also for women and child development, because there is also not so much push this time. And lastly, I also thought to ask Himanshu sir that how do you see this budget in continuation to the run up to 2024? Because that has been saved and that will be a big bang to that time. So how do you see, because since you are also covering elections, so that election also coming, so how do you see in that perspective? Dennis sir, would you like also to ask panelists 2 questions?
Yeah, I'll just add one question here. Particularly, this question can be addressed any panelist, but it will be nice to hear from Mr. Himanshu. See, what is the farmers' expectation? Do they want to legalize MSP? And you are also interacting with policymakers. Now, how do they counter this? Because I come across arguments on both sides, right? One, they say that yes, if you legalize MSP, right, then it will become counterproductive, right? And they have these sides of argument have their own merits. So where do you actually draw a balance here? And the second point is, I fully agree with Dr. Jyotsna when she said that, NREGA kind of schemes, it is giving money directly into the hands of people who have higher propensity, what we call in economics is marginal propensity to consume. And given this current scenario of what is to be done, reducing this NREGA, right? What is the thinking that might have been when the policymakers took this kind of decision of bringing down budget allocation for NREGA, and how it is going to be impacting their the image of the government at the ground root, at the grassroots. I mean, we are not getting into political economy of all this, but then you can actually give us some idea, because I'm sure all these will be signals for what is going to come next. Yeah.
Well, I think Arjun sir, if you can just repeat your second question. I did not take note of. What was the second? First is NREGA flexibility of funds allocation. The second was
Second was that how do you see this budget of 2022-23 as a set of budgets going up to 2024 union elections at the center? And also, sir, if you can add that the PM Kisan, which we are giving 500 rupees direct cash transfer to 11 crore farmers, do you think, because there was also demand that make it 1,000, double it, that sort of, is it helping at the ground?
See, as far as the flexibility of funds for Manrega, you actually have a very important point. Please go back to March 2020. Last week, I think it was 28th March or 29th March, when the first set of relief package was announced by FM. The allocation for Manrega was increased by 40,000 crores. Now, we know that, people would say that series of relief packages that followed the lockdown imposed in the midnight of March 24th, 25th was a kind of a mini budget, in the sense that the economic crisis was so acute and so deep, and Shekhar sir can in fact enlighten us more on this, that the government not only had to freeze the implementation of the new schemes announced for budget, but also all seminars, travels were stopped. And then we saw a new set of measures being announced to actually address the COVID crisis. And of course, one of the first decisions was the increase in allocation of funds for Manrega. Remember, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act is a law of India. It's a demand-driven work. As a worker, I have a right, if I'm registered with the government, I can demand work. And it is the responsibility of the government to give me work. And if they don't give it for 15 days, they have to even pay an unemployment allowance to me. It's a demand-driven work. So there cannot be a fixed fund. There can be an estimation. And I think for any government to make an estimation that next 12 months, how much is the demand going to be, is difficult to make. It depends on what will be the state of the monsoon. For example, if the monsoon is weak, the demand for work will be much more. If the monsoon is very good, workers would perhaps maybe prefer to go and not use Manrega that much. So the availability of funds can be increased. It has been done in 2020, March, April, and we saw that significant increase of allocation even in 2021. So I think that is a constitutional liability of the government to provide funds whenever and how much is needed. If there's a spurt in demand, they have to give. And we have seen the state governments also. In fact, some of them have increased the number of days in which you can claim work under Manrega, or even the wages. The states have the flexibility to increase it if the demand so arises. So state of the monsoon would be very critical. I think is one of the very important variables which decides how much work is actually demanded under Manrega. And once the work demand goes up, the government will have to provide funds. You cannot deny that right that people have to seek work. So, and the second thing is about the MSP, whether it should be legal. See, as a correspondent, I can tell you the first set of demands that the protesting farmers had put before Agriculture Minister, this was sometime September 2020 in the monsoon session, delayed monsoon session because of COVID, that these 3 new laws were implemented, right? And we saw that after that, in I think October, November, when the first round of talks had been held in Agriculture Ministry, the first memorandum given by protesting farmer unions had 3-4 demands. And one, of course, was the demand for a new MSP law. Now, 11 rounds of talks have been held between government representatives and the protesting farmer unions, SKM as they call it, Sayukt Kisan Morcha, a unified body of around 26, 27 farmer union. They have been insistent that there should be an MSP law. Now, this is a demand that has been discussed in the 11 round of meetings that was held between farmer unions and the government. Now, when the Prime Minister announced the withdrawal of the 3 new farm laws, he had also committed that a committee of experts will be constituted to address and look and examine into the issues related with the demand for a new MSP law. Now, that committee has not yet been formed. And this is in many farmers, in many villages in Western UP, they were telling me that for them in these elections, the biggest issue is an MSP law. Any party which will promise us MSP law, we will support them. It is actually they think that this is an unfinished agenda of their farmers' movement. One, of course, was the withdrawal of the laws that has happened, but the demand for a new MSP law. Now, what would be the shape of this MSP law? Whether it would be a legal, of course, farmers are insisting that nothing less than a law is acceptable to them. And I know that from time to time, we have seen the Sayukt Kisan Morcha leaders holding meeting. Even 2 days back, they held a briefing in Press Club of India, where they reminded the government that these are the charter of demands that we had, and these are the unfinished demands in the sense that they have not yet been addressed. So I think we have asked a very, very complex question, and it of course will have a very complex answer in the sense that at the moment we don't even know when the committee will be formed. Now, who are the members who are going to be deliberating on the nature of the MSP system that India needs, what kind of reforms are needed, how much money would be needed. Now, the one thinking is that if you implement an MSP law, it will be impossible for any government to actually give MSP for all important crops. Because there are some estimations on 5 lakh crore, 10 lakh crore, 20 lakh crore. It's not feasible. Many economists say this is not feasible. But the issue is that farmers are insisting that even some of the farmers are saying that we are ready to go back to Delhi and again start our protest, because if you don't give us an MSP, then government would be reneging on the promise that it has made to us. So I think we'll have to wait for the committee to be set up, decide the modalities, hold the round of interactions with the stakeholders.
Mr. Himanshu, probably others also can tie up their answers to this. See, we were also talking about rural inflation, and I'm sure that inflation will easily migrate to the cost of production. And when MSP is linked to cost of production, then it's going to have some impact on budgetary provisions also. We cannot ignore it. And inflation, if you look at the recent trends, right, particularly emerging in the primary sector, which what I mean by primary sector is in the primary articles, including food and mining, minerals, and fuel and power. If you look at this particular segment, then we see that inflation is rising very high. Now, I would like to know from, let's say, Professor Shekhar, right, what is the implication will it carry? One, at one level, you are reducing the purchasing power in rural sector because of this heavy withdrawal on account of this one, Norega. Second one is by means of MSP, right, what's the kind of cushion do we have in the budget that will actually address some of the problems faced by farmers? I'm not talking about rural sector as a whole. I'm talking about, you brought out very clearly, right, how that rural income itself is undergoing diversification, right? Even within agriculture sector also, crop sector share is falling, right? So what is the implication will they carry, right? Could you actually throw some lights on this, please?
Yeah. This about the reduction in Manrega, not reduction, actually they have kept it as at the same budgetary estimate level of previous year, which is pretty low. I think Himanshu ji actually highlighted it very well. Manrega needs to continue, the focus on Manrega needs to continue for some time. And also, Himanshu ji raised an important point about fertilizer subsidy. I think that's something that I missed in my presentation, which is that it seems that the government has actually reduced allocation or their projection of subsidy, fertilizer subsidy is quite low. The budgetary estimates are quite low, and both for fertilizer as well as food subsidy, which makes little sense. It only appears to me as a sleight of hand because the government wants to show that the fiscal deficit will be under control in the coming year, only for that. But otherwise, it doesn't seem to be very pragmatic or even achievable. So that said, let me move to the point of this very important issue of MSP. As for MSP, actually, legalizing MSP is a very tricky issue for two reasons. One, as others have pointed out, the economists' estimates have varied over a wide range, but almost the consensus is that if you take all the costs into account, it will be a huge expenditure. In fact, we have made very detailed estimates of what will be the kind of expenditure that we are looking at if we include, say, all the pulses, all the coarse cereals and oil seeds into this basket, leave alone other things. So with that, it comes to around more than 2.5 lakh crores actually per annum. So that's the kind of estimate. In fact, that paper, we have done a very detailed paper which is under review with EPW. That our estimates seem to suggest on 2.5 lakh crores, and there are various estimates depending on the commodity coverage and other things. But economically, it looks pretty steep. One. Number two, the thing is that at least even for MSP to be really made effective, a part procurement has to be done by the state, at least 20 to 25% of the commodities. If you are extending the MSP coverage, utilizing MSP, then you will have to at least procure a part of it, 20-25%, to be able to lift up the market price so that your fiscal expenditure is not very high. So to do that, if you physically procure, say, 20% of the produce of all the 23 crops that are being produced right now, you're even logistically, the storage capacity just doesn't allow that. So that's the kind of scenario that we are looking at. So feasibility is one aspect. Number two is, if you make something a justiciable right, a legal right, then you also have to think about whether you will be able to really implement it effectively. Otherwise, its credibility will be lost. For example, Manrega is a legal right as of today. But in Manrega, if an employee, a job seeker, does not invest anything upfront, if he does not get a job or he does not find employment under Manrega, he only forgoes certain income, but he will not have invested in anything. So there's no loss per se. But in an MSP crop, suppose we, just for the argument's sake, we legalize MSP, and in the hope of getting the MSP, farmer produces something first, and then he finds that there are no takers, the government actually cannot procure that, or the private sector, there are no deficiency payments in place, then he will incur a huge loss. So then there will be a lot of turmoil. Actually, we'll have to think about how to carry it through, even if it is made, legalizing it is very easy, but actually carrying it through effectively is very difficult. So I'll just quickly add one more point actually about the committee. Yeah, the committee yesterday there was a clarification from the government saying that the committee will be formed after the elections, because they are waiting for the elections to get over and the committee. So we'll have to wait for this committee. And if you see the budgetary allocation, PM Asha, which was supposed to be the flagship program for all these MSP and deficiency payments and all this, it gets a ridiculous, laughable budget of 1 crore this year. 1 crore just. And that is the kind of allocation that is made in this budget. So I think the only reason I can think of is that the government is waiting for this committee to be formed, and so they have notionally put 1 crore there. So they are waiting for this committee to be formed and take this issue forward. Yeah.
Dr. Jyotsna, see, you also brought up this point of declining budget allocation for Narega, right? It has been brought down, and at some point, maybe a few years ago, there was an argument that rural wage rates was going up, particularly in the farm sector, because of the dearth of labor, and labor got diverted from farm sector to non-farm sector because of the great opportunities coming from Narega. So here, is there any connection between the rural inflation and the reduction in the Narega? Do you see any sense there? I mean, and further, it is also linked to MSP, because MSP these days, they are computed on the basis of cost.
Yeah, see, this wage argument was there, and I'm sure there is a link, because but over the years that link, I think, has deteriorated. See, that time when initially Narega came, Narega wages were higher than prevalent wages in many parts of the country, not everywhere. And at that time, that argument, held more ground as compared to that. Today, I don't think that actually is the case. So because Narega wages have not increased as much as the other wages have. So I don't think that the difference is as sharp as it used to be. And I would, I'll come to health in response to Arjun's question, but just before that in general, what has happened in this budget, not only in like sectors that are relevant to rural areas, in all sectors, but definitely agriculture also, that you have greater allocation for example, risk prevention, so like Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana and those kinds of things, rather than the input support or purchase support. Like when you are buying post. If you look at the food security mission, price stabilization, those allocations have gone down. So all that has implications for the MSP bill and all other things that we have been talking about. Moving to health, if you look at overall health, I mean, that applies not to rural or urban, it has remained basically static expenditure as compared to budget, total budget, it has gone slightly down. And so basically stagnant and going downwards. But I think more important is that where you see an increase in the budget, and that again, it's not a new trend, it has been there for past few years, and that has not changed with COVID, is that the focus is on insurance, focus is on health financing rather than health care. And that I think has more serious implications for rural areas as compared to urban areas. Not necessarily the economy, but in terms of access to healthcare, rural areas, definitely it has implications, because all the studies, if you see, health financing is far more successful. There are issues, but still in urban areas, simply because of access. You have healthcare facilities located in urban areas or peri-urban areas at most. So the transport cost is so high, awareness, the information itself is so low, and therefore rural areas access to healthcare gets severely adversely affected if the dependence on health financing goes up rather than thinking of health care. And that is clear here as well. And again, I will bring gender, that women suffer much more in this scenario, because if the high transport cost, lack of information, lack of the need, going by the culture, need for a person to accompany her, to take her to a peri-urban or urban area to access healthcare, all that increases the cost, and therefore they are the last to access these. And that is, if you look at any data, it will tell you. We have done that analysis and seen that. So health also I see a problem, but these are larger choice issues. We are going to that model, and not that that everything should be provided through public provisions, but I think it's important. I mean, look at Europe. Public provisions in certain sectors are critical to even allow otherwise private sectors to flourish. So I think that there is a problem, and there is an argument against the kind of policies that we are seeing in health and education. Thank you. You are muted.
Sir. Yes.
Okay, I think it's time that we'll have to wind up soon. So I'm sure the audience would agree with me that the speakers had brought out the areas where or the heads of accounts where the budget allocation had increased. However, there are three areas which still remains cause of major concerns. One is fertilizer subsidy. We don't see anything happening there. Whereas, based on what Mr. Himanshu shared with us, the ground expectation is huge out there. but then very little happened here. Now you talk about Nurega, yes, employment situation, all of us know, right, what's happening, whereas some amount of reduction happened there. Now, in terms of there is also a third element to this, that is cost of power, right? There is a lot of expectation that the state will have to absorb this. If the states will have to absorb this, I'm sure that it is going to have an effect on the combined deficit of the country. So, whereas on several individual schemes, we see some hike in the budget allocation, but then the question is, we'll have to wait and see what is going to come. Before we wind up, instead of taking 2 minutes, may I pose a question to all the three panelists, right? The question that we started off, right? Whether the Union Budget 2023, will it actually lead to revival of rural employment situation and thereby rural demand, which is central to the private final consumption expenditure in our country? You can take about less than a minute. It will be appreciated. Thank you.
Sir, let me also add one thing which I thought, because there is also now a lot of focus on technology. We have Swamitwa Yojana and then credit associated. Kisan drones was also announced in this. And there is also focus on rural housing and Jal Jeevan Mission as a big push for, especially for the election. So, okay, these all points I thought too. So,
yeah,
whom to start with?
Yes. Yeah, we'll reverse the order, Mr. Himanshu.
Well, the economic survey says that the projected GDP growth in 23 is expected between 8 to 8.5%. Now, in FY 22-23, it is expected to be 9.2%. Now, we do see that, sorry, I stand corrected. In FY 2021-22, it is 9.2%. 22-23, it is expected to be between 8 to 8.5%. There is a variation. Now, there is an element of uncertainty here. The economic survey says that the threat of new variants of corona is still there. We still do not know how the virus is going to mutate. We should not think, the assumption is that the COVID is not gone anywhere. Even today, I was seeing 127,000 Indians have tested positive in last 24 hours. And I wish that we take the threat of Omicron and the other COVID variants far more seriously than what we are doing. And on the lighter side, I remember in Kairana, I was interviewing a BJP candidate, and there were 25, 30 very senior citizens living in villages in Kairana, and none of them was wearing a mask, and they were all looking at us as if we had come from some different planet, and was extremely worried that these men are not wearing masks. I'm not used to watching people not wearing masks. In Parliament, there was a time when every day I had to go through COVID test to enter Parliament. Now, in 21 years of covering Parliament, sir, I remember during the monsoon session of 2020, I took a selfie where there was not a single human being in the background in front of gate number 1. It was like there was a war. India was somewhere part of a war, and there was a seizure everywhere. So, they said, no, Kairana mein koi corona nahi. There is no corona in Kairana. It's only your Delhi thing. You deal with it there. There is no corona here. But the issue is that we're not testing as much as we should be doing. And this is where I think the question about 23 remains, and depends entirely on what happens to COVID pandemic. Okay. And remember, the moment something happens, we see that there is a tension, there are ripple effect, and the projections are brought down. So I think that's where the government managers also told us that, I said that, sir, this is the first time perhaps economic survey says it can be somewhere between 8 to 8.5%. What is the projection? He said, how do we project? Because we don't know the COVID situation. So I think there is an element of uncertainty that economic survey talks about, and it cautions that this sentiment, in fact, it talks about the fact that Omicron is still present and creating havoc in large number of countries. International trade is still affected. World Bank has lowered the global GDP growth projections. Remember, India, of course, is largely integrated with the global economy. So all these factors, inflation is up in many countries. I remember economic survey even says this. So I think all these factors combined together, we are moving into the new financial year.
So that means
Sir,
we are anticipating that Corona is yet to run its full course.
yeah,
Is that-
we don't know what course it is. I mean,
Okay, thank you. And Professor Shekhar?
Yeah, I think, yeah, to your question about whether this will help in attaining a higher employment, and I think the answer is yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, because the focus this time seems to be on the capital expenditure. In fact, capex has a higher multiplier compared to consumption expenditure multiplier. So from theory, at least as economists, we all go back to our textbooks and our own multiplier theories. So from there, it appears that the focus is in the right direction. But at the same time, as Himanshu ji mentioned, actually it all depends on many ifs and buts. So if the pandemic again rears its head or something happens, then we'll be on a dicey wicket.
So there is a serious downside risk. Professor Shekhar?
I think we lost him.
Lost him. Okay, Dr. Jyotsna.
Okay, I actually think, the infrastructure push is a good thing, but I also think, going by even last year's experience, that there is also a time lag. That is one. And therefore, to expect things, even if everything goes well, to happen within this year, I don't think that's going to happen. That is one. Second is that given the diversity and inequality in our country, sorry to come back to that issue repeatedly, I feel that even the infrastructure to be successful, there has to be a threshold. And that actually is far more true for technology-based interventions. That we don't, and I can tell you, I don't have time, I can give you very rigorous research evidences to support my argument that technology-based interventions need particular kinds of thresholds which do not exist. Again, from rural perspective, it's far more true than any other perspective. And therefore, that itself, so many technological intervention, which looks very good on paper and very, sound in terms of its design, it actually becomes extremely unimplementable and exclusionary in implementation, given the fact that, our population, we don't fulfill those thresholds that are compulsory, most essential element for them to be successful. So given these two caveats, forget about COVID. I'm talking of the fact that infrastructure projects have lag elements and the technological projects have extremely limited, they take everything as one, and therefore that makes it extremely difficult in a country like ours, which is highly diverse and highly unequal. I don't see things as rosy as the budget makes it to be. This is not to say that focus on infrastructure is a bad thing.
Okay. Professor Shekhar, you had any point to add, or because we lost you?
Actually, yeah, I was almost done. Then I lost my connection.
Okay.
So, thanks.
Okay. We always, sometimes we have to remind ourselves of what Keynes used to say: in the long run, we are all dead. And what is posing the major challenges to Indian economy is the demand, which is more of short term. So excess focus on capital investment, whether it's going to be really salvaging the situation that we are witnessing in the rural segment, remains a major question. However, as a closing remark, I must actually say that the problems faced by the rural sector in our country is mostly structural, and they are also determined by historical and social factors. And therefore, addressing all ailments of rural sector in a single budget, I'm sure you'll agree with me, that is an impossible task. However, what we can ask for is a kind of incremental approach. Keeping this in mind, when we actually listen to the speakers and to the major elements of the budget thrust they brought out, particularly when they actually outlined the proposed public spending on both capital and revenue accounts, appears to be good. As usual, as we always say, that much depends upon how conditions would unfold, because as Mr. Himanshu and Professor Shekhar had already pointed out, the expectation is that the Corona-19 and its impact is yet to run its full course. So we have to see how conditions would unfold. Of course, associated with this is the resource mobilization and more importantly, implementation. Now, this calls for exposition of projected downside risks. And I somehow tend to think that the budget misses this. So one has to wait and see if the rural dream of the finance minister, right, as she kept on saying, right, during the budget time as well as after the budget, whether it will remain fulfilled or not. So with these expectations, right, I wish to bring the session to a close. I wish to thank all panelists for making valuable contribution to the discussion, and particularly IMPRI for arranging this discussion. Thank you so much. Now over to the organizers, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Such an enriching and at length discussion. Thank you, everyone. So to formally give the vote of thanks, now I invite Sakshi Sharda. Sakshi.
Thank you, sir. As we come to the end of this extremely enlightening discussion, I, Sakshi Sharda, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, would like to formally propose a vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. We are grateful to Dr. J. Dennis Rajakumar for taking out the time for being with us and sharing such a thought-provoking talk on rural realities and the Union Budget 2022-23. Thank you, sir. We thank our discussants, Professor C. Sekhar, Himanshu Shekhar Mishra, and Dr. Jyotsna Jha, for adding their diverse perspectives and valuable insights to the deliberation. And of course, we thank all our participants who are here on Zoom or on Facebook Live for participating and raising pertinent questions. And we are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on one of our podcasts. Thank you again, and I hope that you continue to tune in on future episodes of the State of Villages #Rural Reality series, as well as other lined up deliberations on the Budget 22-23 and IMPRI Web Policy Talks. Thank you once again, and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Himanshu. Thank you, Professor Shekhar.
Thank you.